The first time I realized my stepfather had stolen from me, I was standing inside a military finance office on base. The air was cold, smelling of floor wax and old coffee, but I was sweating. I had gone there to fix what I thought was a simple clerical error regarding my basic allowance for housing. The civilian clerk behind the desk kept staring at her computer screen like she thought she had made a giant mistake. She clicked her mouse several times, her brow furrowed in deep confusion. Then she looked up slowly, her eyes wide behind her glasses, and asked why my father was listed as my dependent sponsor. My stomach dropped so hard it physically hurt, a cold wave of nausea washing over me. I am an active duty airman, I don't have a dependent sponsor. Before I could even find the words to answer her, my phone exploded with an incoming call from Victor. The clerk accidentally hit the speaker button while handing the device back to me across the counter. Suddenly, his loud, aggressive voice filled the entire office for everyone to hear. "That money belongs to this family after everything we sacrificed for her," he roared. Every soldier in the room turned to stare at me while my face burned with hot humiliation. The clerk then whispered something that changed my life. "Ma'am, this may qualify as federal identity theft." I drove back to Ashford Ridge that same night, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I walked through the front door and confronted Victor right during Sunday dinner. He didn't even look up or deny it, he just sat there calmly carving a thick steak while my mother, Elena, cried quietly into her napkin beside him. "Family shares resources," he said with a chilling calmness that made my skin crawl. My stepbrother, Leo, laughed like the whole thing was a funny joke while Victor explained he had used my military housing allowance to help the household. I felt like I was trapped in a bad dream. Then I found out the most disgusting part: most of the money had actually gone toward paying off Leo's massive gambling debts. When I stood my ground and threatened to report him to the authorities, Victor leaned closer across the table and smiled a wicked, jagged smile. "Go ahead," he dared me. "Tell the military your own family had access to your credentials." That's when I realized he wasn't just stealing my hard-earned money. He was a predator who was trying to trap me and ruin my career too. He thought he had me cornered because we were supposed to be family, but he was wrong. The next morning, the sun was barely up when I made a discovery that made my blood boil. I found out that important military paperwork had been secretly rerouted to my mother's address for nearly a year. Outside the house sat a locked black mailbox that Victor suddenly refused to let anyone touch or even look at. It sat there like a dark sentinel guarding his secrets. I confronted my mother, and she finally admitted through her tears that Victor had been intercepting my mail for months, keeping me in the dark about my own life. Then she leaned in and whispered something that made my blood run absolutely cold: "He tried applying for survivor benefits using your military records." I remember staring at her in total silence, wondering how long this betrayal had really been happening behind my back. He wasn't just taking my current pay, he was betting on my death. He had turned my service to this country into a twisted insurance policy for himself. I felt a sense of dread that I had never felt even during basic training. My own home had become a battlefield, and I didn't even know who the enemy was until now. Victor had spent months building a cage out of my own identity, and the bars were getting tighter every single day. When military investigators called me onto base a few days later, I assumed the situation was just about the stolen housing allowance payments. I thought we would sign some papers and it would be over. I was horribly wrong. They sat me down in a small, windowless room and showed me things that made my head spin. There were fraudulent loan applications tied to my military identity, fake reimbursement claims for travel I never took, and even a contractor account opened under my name at a local supply store. It was like there was a second version of me living a life of crime. One investigator, a man with tired eyes and a stern face, looked at me carefully before asking a question that hung heavy in the air: "Does your stepfather have a criminal background?" The long silence that followed answered for me. I realized then that I didn't know Victor at all. He had used my social security number to build a mountain of lies that was now threatening to fall on me. My military career, the thing I worked so hard for, was being used as a shield for a con artist. I felt sick knowing my clean record was being dragged through the dirt by a man who claimed to be my family. A deputy sheriff named Julian Vance helped me break into one of Victor's abandoned storage units located on the outskirts of town. The heavy metal door creaked open, and the place smelled like mold, dust, and old motor oil. It was dark and cramped, but what we found inside was a gold mine of betrayal. There were boxes piled high, filled with stolen paperwork. My paperwork. I saw my deployment files scattered on the floor, my private military records shoved into folders, and dozens of pages covered in fake signatures where he had practiced mimicking my handwriting. Then Julian opened a specific folder labeled, Emergency Beneficiary Changes. Inside was the paperwork showing Victor had tried replacing my mother as my emergency contact and my primary financial beneficiary. That was the exact moment I stopped seeing this as just a simple case of theft. It wasn't about the money anymore, it felt deeply personal and incredibly dangerous. He wanted total control over my life and my death. He had spent hours in this dusty shed planning how to erase my mother and take everything for himself. Standing in that moldy unit, I realized I wasn't just a daughter to him. I was an asset to be harvested. Julian looked at me with pity, but all I felt was a cold, hard fire. Victor didn't stop at just stealing, he decided to use the community against me. He humiliated me publicly the following Sunday at our church. Right there in front of the entire congregation, during the middle of the service, he stood up with a fake look of sadness on his face. He told everyone I was trying to send my own family to prison over a misunderstanding. I felt hundreds of pairs of eyes turned toward me, full of judgment. People started whispering immediately, their voices sounding like a swarm of angry bees. Then Leo took it even further. He uploaded a video online of me arguing with Victor, but he edited it to make me look like the villain. The clip spread through our small town within hours, appearing on everyone's social media feeds with captions calling me the ungrateful military daughter. For the first time since I joined the Air Force, I felt ashamed to be wearing my uniform in public. People I had known my whole life were looking at me like I was a monster. They didn't see the stolen money or the forged signatures, they only saw a daughter turning on her father. Victor was winning the war of words, and I was drowning in the shame he had manufactured for me. Later that same night, the truth became even darker. I was in the kitchen helping my mother clean up the dishes when I noticed dark, purple bruises on her wrists. At first, she tried to pull her sleeves down and hide them from me, making excuses about being clumsy. But when I grabbed her hand and looked her in the eyes, she finally broke down crying, her shoulders shaking with fear. She confessed that Victor had become violent after debt collectors started showing up at the house day and night. He owed more money than anyone in the family had realized. My mother looked absolutely terrified when she whispered the words that haunted me. He said your military money was the only thing keeping us alive. That was the terrifying moment I realized just how dangerous he had become. He wasn't just a thief or a liar. He was a desperate man who was using violence to keep his secrets safe. He was holding my mother hostage with his debts and using my paycheck to stay afloat. I knew then that if I didn't stop him, he would eventually destroy her just like he was trying to destroy me. This wasn't a family anymore, it was a crime scene waiting to happen. The pressure from the investigation started to take a real toll on my life. Military finance temporarily froze my housing payments while the investigators reviewed all the complex fraud claims. Suddenly, the money stopped coming in, and I couldn't pay my rent for my apartment near the base. I was facing eviction while trying to serve my country. Even worse, my commanding officer called me into his office and privately asked whether I had willingly shared my financial access information with Victor. I could see the doubt in his eyes, and I felt my entire career starting to collapse around me. Then, to make matters even worse, somebody leaked the details of the investigation online. I don't know if it was Victor or Leo, but it was out there for the world to see. The comments on the news articles and social media posts were absolutely brutal. Strangers were calling me a traitor and saying I should be court-martialed. I felt like I was being attacked from every side. My money was gone, my reputation was in tatters, and my superiors were questioning my integrity. I was a soldier who had survived deployments, but I felt like I was losing this battle against a man sitting in my own living room. Victor decided to take his lies to the public. He gave a staged interview outside the family house, pretending to be a heartbroken victim. He looked into the cameras and told reporters that I had willingly helped him financially for months before suddenly turning against the family for no reason. He played the part of the struggling father perfectly. Then Leo posted fake screenshots on the internet that made it look like I had approved the money transfers myself through text messages. Strangers online started calling me a fraud and a liar. I felt like I was screaming into a void and nobody could hear the truth. Meanwhile, Julian quietly did some digging and discovered that Leo had just purchased a brand new truck entirely in cash. It was a bright, expensive vehicle that he certainly couldn't afford on his own. It was a slap in the face. While I was struggling to pay my rent and save my career, they were out there buying shiny new toys with the money they stole from my life. They were celebrating their crimes while the world blamed me for their actions. The injustice of it all made me feel like my heart was going to explode with rage. I needed proof, and I needed it fast. My mother finally found a way to help me. She secretly pulled me aside and handed me a small silver key that she had hidden inside one of her old recipe books. Her hands were shaking as she told me it led to a safe deposit box downtown that Victor didn't know she had found. I went there immediately, my heart pounding against my ribs. Inside the box were years of Victor's hidden financial documents, fake business filings, and even more forged signatures. He had been running scams long before he met my mother. Then I found something in the very back that made my hands shake with pure terror. A forged military power of attorney document signed with a perfect imitation of my signature. Victor hadn't just stolen my housing allowance or my social security number. He had used that document to steal my identity completely. With that piece of paper, he could sign for anything, access any account, and make life-altering decisions as if he were me. It was the smoking gun I needed. He had built a complete shadow version of my life to serve his own greed. I finally had the evidence that this wasn't a misunderstanding or a family sharing resources. It was a cold, calculated, and total theft of a human being's identity. The situation moved far beyond a local police matter very quickly. 2 federal agents arrived at my apartment unexpectedly one rainy evening, their dark coats dripping on my floor. That alone terrified me because I didn't know if they were there to help me or arrest me. We sat at my small kitchen table, the atmosphere heavy with tension. But then one of them looked at me and asked a question that changed the entire scope of the case. Did you know restricted military-related access materials were found inside your stepfather's files? I felt a sharp shard of ice move through my chest. This wasn't just about my bank account or a forged signature anymore. By stealing my credentials and accessing my military records, Victor had crossed into serious federal territory. He had gained access to things he was never supposed to see. He wasn't just a common identity thief anymore, he was a threat to military security. The agents explained that because he had used my military identity to bypass certain safeguards, the Department of Defense was now involved. I realized that Victor had played a game much bigger than he understood, and the consequences were about to be much more severe than a local jail sentence. He had poked a sleeping giant, and I was caught in the middle. Despite the federal heat, Victor was still arrogant. During a large barbecue for the Lawson family, he tried to humiliate me again in front of all our relatives. He stood by the grill, holding a beer, and called me dramatic and ungrateful. He told the cousins I was brainwashed by the military, and had forgotten where I came from. I let him finish his little speech while everyone watched in uncomfortable silence. Then, I calmly walked to the table and pulled out the forged power of attorney papers I had found in the safe deposit box. I placed them right on the table in front of the entire family. The backyard went completely silent as people leaned in to see my forged signature. Then Victor exploded in a way I had never seen before. He lost all control and slammed his fist through a glass patio table, glass shattering everywhere while the young children started screaming in terror nearby. That was the first time the entire family finally looked afraid of him instead of me. They saw the monster behind the mask of the struggling family man. His mask didn't just slip, it shattered into 1,000 pieces right along with that table. He had shown everyone exactly who he was, a violent, desperate criminal. A few nights after the backyard explosion, Leo reached out to me. He looked terrified when he secretly met me behind an abandoned gas station on the edge of town, the flickering neon lights casting long shadows. He was shaking and kept looking over his shoulder. That's when he finally admitted the truth. He had been helping Victor sell stolen veteran information through various debt scams. They were targeting people who had served their country, just like me. Then Leo showed me a series of threatening text messages Victor had been sending him, promising to hurt him if he talked to anyone. For the first time in my life, I realized that Leo was just as scared of Victor as my mother was. He had been a partner in crime, but now he was just another victim of Victor's desperation. He told me Victor was planning to run if things got too hot. Seeing my stepbrother look so broken and small made me realize how far Victor's rot had spread. He had corrupted his own son and turned him into a criminal, then threatened him to keep him quiet. The web of lies was falling apart, and Leo was the first one to get caught in the threads. Things took a terrifying turn for the worse when I drove to the house one morning and found my mother gone. I walked through the quiet rooms, calling her name, but there was no answer. I found her purse sitting on the kitchen table, and even more frightening, her daily medication was still there. She never went anywhere without them. Victor was sitting in the living room, acting completely normal, claiming she just needed some space and had gone for a walk. But something felt horribly, dangerously wrong. I called Julian immediately. He used his resources to track her phone to a cheap roadside motel near the state line. When I finally burst into that room and found her, she broke down in my arms, sobbing uncontrollably. She admitted that Victor had threatened her life after he found out she gave me the key to the safe deposit box. He had driven her there and told her to stay hidden or else. I had never seen my mother look that broken or that hollow before. He had used her love and her fear to keep his crimes hidden, and when that failed, he tried to make her disappear. I knew then that there was no going back. Victor had to be stopped before he killed someone. The military finally summoned me before an administrative review panel to decide my future. I walked into that room in my best uniform, but my heart was heavy. My entire career was suddenly at risk because of the cloud of fraud hanging over my head. To my horror, Victor's attorney actually showed up at the hearing. He had the nerve to argue that I was the one at fault because I had failed to secure my military identity properly. He tried to make it look like I was negligent and that Victor was just a victim of my mistakes. I could feel the coldness in the room and the board members looking at me with suspicion. I felt the room slowly turning against me, the walls closing in. But then, the tide finally turned. A forensic analyst from the base took the stand and revealed the truth. He showed evidence that Victor had accessed my accounts using cloned devices that were connected inside my mother's home. He proved it was a high-tech, intentional hack, not a case of me being careless with my password. The silence that followed his testimony felt enormous. The board members looked at the evidence, then at me, then at Victor's attorney. The truth was finally louder than the lies. Julian obtained one more piece of critical evidence, old surveillance footage from a local shipping and notary store that Victor used for notarizing his fake documents. We sat in the police station and watched the grainy black and white video. I watched my stepfather, with a calm look on his face, forge my signature with his own hand while Leo stood lookout near the door. It was undeniable. Then Julian paused the footage suddenly and pointed at the screen. Another man appeared briefly in the background, talking to Victor. My heart stopped. It was a retired military clerk named Silas whom I had once trusted completely. He had been my mentor when I first joined. Seeing his face on that screen, helping the man who was trying to ruin me, was a betrayal that hurt almost worse than anything Victor had done. I realized then that Victor hadn't acted alone. He had an inside man who knew exactly how the system worked. This wasn't just a family member being greedy, it was a coordinated attack on my life. Silas had sold me out for a paycheck, and he had given Victor the keys to my identity. The betrayal felt like a physical weight, making it hard to breathe. The investigation into Silas revealed the full depth of the conspiracy. I discovered that the retired clerk had secretly been feeding Victor personnel access information for years in exchange for monthly cash payments. Silas knew all the loopholes and all the ways to stay under the radar. Worse, I found out he had actually worked in the military records office during my very first overseas deployment. He had been watching my career and my finances from the beginning. That's when the horrifying realization hit me. This entire operation had been carefully planned long before I ever noticed a single penny missing from my housing allowance. Victor hadn't just accidentally stumbled into stealing from me. He had built a complex, professional system around it, using Silas's insider knowledge to exploit every possible advantage. They had been waiting for the right moment to strike, and they had been harvesting my information for years. I wasn't just a victim of a bad stepfather, I was the target of a long-term criminal enterprise. Every promotion I earned and every deployment I survived was just another opportunity for them to steal more. It made my entire life feel like a lie they had written for me. I decided to confront Victor privately one last time after I learned the full, ugly truth about his system. I found him in the backyard, sitting in the dark. For once, he stopped pretending to be the victim or the caring father figure. He looked directly at me with cold, dead eyes and said the words I will never forget, "Your uniform made you useful." That's all. He didn't see me as a person, let alone a daughter. I was just a tool he used to get what he wanted. My mother was standing in the shadows of the hallway and overheard everything he said. She started crying immediately, a quiet, broken sound that echoed in the night. But Victor didn't even look ashamed or try to apologize. He just sat there, unbothered by her pain. That moment shattered something inside me permanently. Any lingering hope I had for a family or a reconciliation was gone. I realized then that you can't fix someone who doesn't think they are broken. He was a predator who had found a way to feed on my life, and he would have kept doing it until there was nothing left of me. I walked away from him that night knowing it was the last time I would ever speak to him as a free man. The end came quickly after that. Federal agents raided Victor's house just before sunrise, the blue and red lights flashing against the quiet neighborhood homes. Neighbors gathered on their lawns in their robes, watching in shock as agents carried out boxes and boxes of stolen records, forged documents, and seized electronics through the front yard. It was a massive scene. Leo was arrested separately at a gas station while he was trying to leave town with a large amount of cash hidden in the door panels of his new truck. Victor went out exactly how you would expect, screaming and fighting. He shouted that I had destroyed the family and that I was a traitor while the agents handcuffed him in front of everyone. He tried to make one last scene, one last attempt to make me feel guilty. But as I stood there on the sidewalk, watching them put him into the back of a black SUV, I realized something important. For the first time in many years, I wasn't afraid of him anymore. His power was gone. The family he claimed I destroyed had been a lie he created to keep himself rich. I watched the cars drive away, and for the first time, I felt like I could finally breathe. During the pre-trial hearings, the evidence against Victor was overwhelming. The prosecutors played a secret recording that my mother had captured months earlier on her phone when she was hiding in the kitchen. Victor's voice filled the courtroom, sounding arrogant and cruel. "Military families are the easiest people to manipulate," he bragged. The room went dead silent as his words hung in the air. I watched the people in the gallery, including several veterans, physically recoil in their seats after hearing him laugh about exploiting people who serve. In that one moment, everyone finally saw the true face of the man I had lived with for years. He wasn't a misunderstood family man, he was a predator who viewed service members as easy prey. The recording destroyed any chance he had of a sympathetic defense. He looked smaller in his suit, avoiding everyone's eyes as the weight of his own words crushed his reputation. My mother sat beside me, her hand in mine, finally seeing the world see him for who he truly was. The mask was gone for good, and the truth was finally being told in a place where he couldn't shout over it. Facing the prospect of decades in federal prison, Leo finally broke. He agreed to testify against Victor in exchange for a lighter sentence. When he took the stand, he admitted everything. He told the court that Victor had stolen identities from multiple military families across 3 different states over several years. I wasn't the only one, we were just the latest targets. Then Leo looked down at his hands and quietly told the investigators the most heartbreaking thing of all: he taught me people only matter if they're useful. Hearing my stepbrother say that broke my heart more than I expected it to. It showed just how much Victor had destroyed his own son's soul. He had raised a child to believe that love didn't exist, only exploitation. Leo was a criminal, yes, but he was also a product of Victor's toxic world. He had never had a chance to be a good person with a father like that. As Leo stepped down from the stand, he didn't look at Victor once. The bond they had built on crime was gone, replaced by the cold reality of a courtroom. Victor sat there stone-faced, watching his own son dismantle his life piece by piece. A few days before the final sentencing, my mother gave me a sealed letter she had written years earlier, her handwriting shaky on the envelope. Inside, she admitted the truth she had been too ashamed to tell me. She had tried leaving Victor several times in the past, but she stayed because he had threatened her with total financial ruin and told her he would make sure I was kicked out of the military. She had been protecting me the only way she knew how, even if it meant living in fear. Then she wrote something at the bottom of the page that I will never forget: never mistake his inability to love properly as proof that you were difficult to love. I cried harder reading that letter than I did during the entire investigation or the trial. All those years I had felt like I wasn't enough for him, like I was the problem. But it was never about me. It was about his own darkness. My mother's words finally gave me the permission I needed to stop blaming myself for his choices. I realized I had always been worthy of love, I was just looking for it in a man who didn't know how to give it. During the final trial, Victor's attorney made one last, desperate attempt to save him. He tried painting me as an emotional, unstable, and vindictive daughter who was out for revenge. He questioned my memory and my motives. But when I finally took the stand, I stayed perfectly calm. I had been through survival training, and I knew how to stay focused under pressure. I looked directly at the jury, making eye contact with every single one of them, and said the words that defined my journey: I survived overseas deployments. I never expected the greatest threat to my identity would come from my own home. The courtroom became so incredibly quiet that I could literally hear people breathing in the back rows. The power of the truth was undeniable. I wasn't a victim anymore, I was a witness. I told them about the mailbox, the bruises on my mother, and the power of attorney document. I spoke for myself, for my mother, and for the other military families Victor had targeted. When I stepped down from the stand, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. I had done my duty, and the rest was up to the law. The jury didn't take long to reach a decision. Victor was convicted on multiple counts of federal identity theft, wire fraud, and several other serious charges. The judge was harsh, calling his actions predatory and disgusting. Before the officers escorted him away to start his long sentence, Victor looked at me over his shoulder. For a split second, I saw something in his eyes that looked like he expected forgiveness or a final word of comfort. Instead, I simply looked back at him and said, "You taught me exactly what kind of person I never want to become." I didn't say it with anger, I said it with a finality that ended our connection forever. For the first time in my entire life, the man who always had an excuse or a loud insult had absolutely nothing left to say. He turned away and walked out of the courtroom in handcuffs. Silas, the retired clerk, was also sentenced for his part in the scheme. The system that Victor had built to exploit others had finally been used to hold him accountable. The war was over, and the villain had finally lost. I walked out of that courthouse into the fresh air, feeling the weight of the last year finally lift off my shoulders. Months later, life began to look very different. I used a portion of the money we recovered from the frozen accounts to launch a small non-profit organization. Our mission is to help military families and young recruits protect themselves from financial exploitation and identity theft. During one of our first seminars, a young female recruit pulled me aside after I spoke. She leaned in and whispered, "Your story made me feel less ashamed." Hearing that made everything I went through feel worth it. Standing there beneath the warm autumn sunlight outside the community center, I finally understood something profound. Justice is what happened in that courtroom, and it gave me my name and my reputation back. But peace. Peace came from realizing that broken, toxic people no longer had the power to define my worth or my future. I am not the ungrateful daughter or the fraud that Victor tried to make me. I am a soldier, a daughter, and a survivor. My mother and I have a new home now, one without locked mailboxes or hidden bruises. We are building a life based on truth instead of lies, and for the first time, the future looks bright and clear. I finally have my peace.